Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's exciting webinar, Creating Generative Change. My name is Christina, and on behalf of myosh, we are thrilled to have you with us today as we dive into some of the most complex work challenges in high-risk sectors like mining and aviation. Now, let me introduce to you today's presenter. We are honoured to have with us Daniel Hamadal, Director of Safety Innovation at Southpac International. Daniel has extensive experience working in high-risk industries, and his work focuses on helping organisations embrace real-world complexities and harness the often overlooked potential within teams. In today's session, Daniel will walk us through how to shift from simplistic social frameworks to creating meaningful, sustainable change across all levels of your organisation. So today is your chance to learn how to tackle those tricky, complex problems head on and take away practical strategies to apply in your own workplace. Now, before we get started, as always, I would love to encourage all of you to make this session as interactive as possible. So you'll notice the chat box and the Q&A function right there on your screens, and we'd love for you to use them. So drop your thoughts, your questions, comments throughout the session, and we'll be sure to get to them throughout. So without further ado, I think it's time we let Daniel into the room and welcome him, and take it away, Daniel.
Thank you, Christina. It's good to be back. Yes. Today I want to talk about how we can engage people at all levels of organization in tackling complex challenges that we face. And I believe and I know that every organization is a bundle of human potential to do more, to create, to care, to detect, assess, and figure out many things, not just safety, but the operational challenges that we see. But most of the time, we don't really want to tap into this vast human potential that is available to us. We prefer to be a bit more like what I have on slide 1 here. We put the change makers' needs at the center of our change efforts. It's the change makers' ideas, their budget, their need to have a great career or whatever it is that is driving their change efforts. And that is a huge missed opportunities, because normally we just get a few people that get to direct what needs to happen next. And then we end up having to sell this to the more or less unwilling consumers of these ideas. And there are real risks with that. And I think this picture encapsulates that quite neatly, that the biggest risk perhaps is that we don't understand the real complexities that people face. But I think also, so our change efforts become superficial, or they're not calibrated to the real world constraints or conditions that people face. But the bigger loss for me is that we miss the ideas, the creativity, the insight, the experience, the potential for ownership and engagement and pride in the workplace, and create a really thriving workplace by limiting the number of people that can be in the meeting room here with, where we have the people with ties. So essentially what I'm going to argue today is for a process where we open up that door, we step into the complexity, and we invite more people into this room to design what solutions can look like and figure out a way to go. And it's kind of messy to do so, and it's a little bit risky because you don't really know what you're going to find in terms of what are people going to bring to you, what solutions they're going to come up with. But this process, there's ways, there's techniques to work that out. And I want to start telling a story of how this played out for me. And this was a few years ago. I had a phone call from a head of health and safety for a major international airline. They asked me to come and join a meeting. There was a bit of anxiety in the group. There was a meeting between senior health and safety leaders, and they were all really upset because they had been reports coming from a particular site about some working at height issues on one of their maintenance sites. So aircraft technicians and engineers have been observed walking on wings without wearing proper fall arrest harnesses. There's been a lack of nets in front of cabin doors, and there were, people hanging out the cockpit windows to address things, and there were lots of issues going on there. And the group were talking about what they could do to get on top of this issue, and it was the usual suspect of solutions coming out. There was, we should have, posters up on the walls about, this is what we must do. This is what we must not do. These standards that we believe in and what we don't accept on our side. And someone suggested we should have this commitment ceremony where people walk up and sign on to a behavioral charter as if, I agree to follow, the best way. And, that sort of role model leadership, constraining people, behavioral lassos really around people's behaviors and values, and trying to constrain people into that. And at that stage, I always get a little bit nervous, but I felt like I had to say something because I just don't believe in what this way of going about it. I essentially wanted to open the door and say, I don't think this solution is going to work. But you can't really blurt it out like that when you're consulting. You have to be a bit, soft with it. So I said, tell me more about this solution. Have they ever worked in the past? And the group just felt quiet because they don't. Those solutions don't work, not for that type of complex challenge. And we didn't know what we were in a complex challenge back then, but the group was quiet and they looked at me and they said, well, what do you want to do then? What do you suggest? How can we fix this? We need to do something. And I said, yeah, I agree. But to me, it's a mystery why aircraft engineers that are so professional in my experience, and I'm a trained pilot myself, so I know quite a few mechanics and technicians. Why would they not use this equipment? To me, it didn't make any sense. So I said, well, let me go to site. Let me go and talk to these people about what is important to them, what are they trying to achieve, what are they trying to get away from, what's difficult for them. And after a little bit of negotiation, they say, okay, you can go there and run the focus groups, but you have to bring up working at height in every conversation. I said, okay, I'll do that. So I went aside and I spoke to people about, tell me about when your work is difficult. What's going on here? I'm just here to learn. I don't know what's going on. And people, first of all, in every focus group, people spoke about working at height. I didn't have to bring it up once, which was delightful for me. But people spoke about many other issues as well, about how the base maintenance crew was treated very differently to the line maintenance crew, how the two crews didn't get along. Base maintenance is where you take the aircraft apart. Line maintenance is the stuff you do in between flights, really. And there were issues about training, about the IT system, and it was just really difficult to get work done. So I recorded all these conversations and I highlighted the stories that were in there and I printed them out on A4 sheets. And then I invited people from head office and people from site to come together and read these stories collectively, to just say, hey, this is a good story, or I don't like this one, or this one seems to be about training, or whatever it was. And then they started to talk about what can we do about this? Because a lot of stories here about tools, a lot of stories about the scaffolding, or when working at height around the fuselage of the aircraft and around the engines. So there were lots of issues going on there, and they sort of made sense of that together. And then they decided to kick off a site improvement team, which was just a group of people working together to suggest ideas for how can we address to make this a tighter site or have better solutions. And they have a leader in there that could say yes or no. We have a budget. I need to go to corporate and ask for permission, whatever solution they were looking at. And within 2 months, they've gone from problem child to a center of excellence that other people in the company were traveling to learn about how they could get this sort of improvement cycle going. But that's the issue here, right? That we have in our organization a lot of technical problems, and working at height is a technical problem. There's a clear-cut technical solution to quite a few different ones, actually. And I think health and safety professionals are very well trained in identifying technical problems and technical solutions and rolling them out. That is what the profession has been set up and asked to do in many organizations and through their basic training as well. And that's enough for a range of issues that we face. But how do you create a thriving workplace? That is not a technical problem. That is a complex human challenge. How do we address well-being in the workplace? There is no technical solution to that. How do we address crime in our society if you wanted to level this up? There is no clear-cut technical solution because the problem goes a little bit everywhere. It goes into socioeconomic things. It goes into how we relate to each other as a society, if you stay with the crime issue. But on site, it's how does head office relate to site? How do crews relate to each other? How do we work together? How do we figure out what to do in which order? There's a lot of very sort of, we could call them soft issues, but they are really important collaborative issues. And no one really owns them, or everyone owns them, but we need to really work together to figure them out. So it's difficult to agree what the problem is. And we need changes in a lot of places, not only in sort of the external environment, but also within ourselves in sort of, yeah, I actually want to step forward to make a change in here rather than just complain about it. And in fact, I believe that people need to be involved in generating the solution. That if you give people a solution, they will normally refuse it because they haven't been involved in it. And I see this happening a lot around safety culture. I believe that safety culture is a very complex adaptive challenge. How do we create a safety culture? But a lot of organizations, they still buy an off-the-shelf safety culture program that's been developed for an oil platform in the North Sea, and it should fit a forestry crew in this part of the world, which is, a really risky assumption. I think it's, riskier to do that than to develop something local and build on that. So for the complex adaptive challenges, there are no best practices. You have to figure things out. You have to build them locally and find a way forward because you don't really know what's going to work in that context. So you need to start small and scale it up. So when I worked in mining, it's probably almost 15 years ago that I started this, I developed this process. And back then we called it ALPHA, which was an acronym, ALFA, ask, listen, which was essentially the exploration of the process. Go out there, ask a bunch of questions, be curious, and listen. More importantly, listen to what people say. And then find out, which is really this, I think it's better to call understand, because understand is never ending. Find out is some, there's a truth out there, which is we can debate all day. And then the A of alpha was act, which I now talk more about. We need to collaborate. We need to move from this sort of messy, multi-directional situation on the left to more aligned, heading in the same direction, collaboration on the right-hand side here. So today I want to share a bit of a process and some call them hacks, I guess, in each step here that you hopefully start practicing in your own workplace. So I'm going to start with exploring and then moving to understand and collaborate. So just opening the door and stepping into this complexity requires us to just be okay with what is happening to begin with. Well, we don't have to be okay, but we could just suspend judgment. We don't have to react to it. We don't have to fix it. Just observe it for a bit and be curious about it. Where does it come from? When did it start? And what are the conditions and events and configurations that enable this? So just follow things. Pick something up, pick up thread and just follow it. And it's going to take you to all kinds of interesting places. It's going to lead you to supervise. It's going to lead you to leaders. It's going to lead you to corporate. It's going to, it just takes you to different, but you don't have to be worried about starting in the right place. Just start somewhere. And as you listen to it, you get questions emerging about, well, who else cares about the issue? People talk about tools. Well, obviously the person heading up the tool store or the procurement person, okay, I need to go to talk to them about what's their story about this situation, because they have their version of things. And you gradually start to learn what matters to people here. And that is a really important insight because you can organize a lot of what, the next session. If people talk to you about tools, well, in the next session, you can just bring up tools because it's close to their heart and they're going to start talking about that. Make space for competing perspectives. Frontline sometimes talk about work challenges very differently to how supervisors talk about them. Line maintenance talk about them differently to base maintenance. And you just be a host or be a container for those multiple truths. You don't have to make a call which one is the correct one. This is not an investigation. This is about making information flow from you rather than sort of finding the one truth here. And as you listen to people's stories, you will hear these anti-stories. Why should I tell you anything? Because 2 years ago, someone like you came here. They asked us for all our stories, and nothing ever came out of it. So there's all these anti-stories that will set you up to fail, if you will. And just acknowledge it. Yep, that sounds interesting. That sounds really frustrating. Tell me what happened. What was that initiative? How was it communicated? There's a story there. Listen to those as well, because that gives you a license or the benefit of doubt of it to be this could be different this time around.
It also gives you a backstory as to what's happened in the past in the company and what you might potentially find again moving forward, that they weren't those problems weren't actioned or those changes weren't put into place. So it's kind of like a good little thing to exactly what you said. Acknowledge the anti-stories, acknowledge the negativity bias and the assumptions from the past, because it's going to give you an insight into what's to come.
And chances are they could have tried, something that starts similar, but I will go down a different route with my process. But so if you're interested in, this is sort of operational learning, and you have learning teams and, HOP, and there's a lot of tools out there now that have lots of good question guides for you to just ask questions. The one that has served me best over these years has been this question that I have on the slide here. Tell me about a time when your work was difficult. People just stop and say, yeah, no, I have those times that I can talk about. But the trick is here to move to specific stories or events or experiences people have. So if people say, for example, my supervisor is an idiot, I can say, well, that sounds really interesting. Tell me about a time when they were being an idiot, right? Go back to a time and a place, because if you just collect opinions at this stage, they're going to be dismissed by other people later on as an opinion. But if you get to stories that have actually happened, they can't be refuted that easily. So keep digging, and people will understand that only this real stories about what has happened or conditions that are verifiable can leave the room. They get to collaborate with you on that. So some of the stories that I collect, just to show you some of the power of the stories that come out of this. Here's one such story. We cannot sign the paperwork, we cannot finish the work if we don't have a thermometer with us, because cable tension, this is from aircraft, right? Cable tension varies with temperature. We have to get that temperature set up, how much tension we will put. I've been looking and asking around for the last 5 days, couldn't find it. And he stopped here. The story stopped. And I asked him, so what did you do? How did you get over this? Have we still not set the cable tension, or what is it? And he said, well, in the end, I used my iPhone, and, any smartphone, it's not the temperature in the hangar. It's general for the place where the hangar is located. So there's a likely source of error. But when you tell this to aircraft engineers, they get shocked, because this is not how they want to work. They are very professional. They want to have the proper setup. And if they're revoked of that setup, work happens. And there's performance pressure to keep delivering, because the aircraft needs to go out. If the aircraft is late, there's all kinds of fines for the maintenance organization to not have it back into production as quickly as it needs to be. And you learn so much. You can follow this into the tool store. You can follow it up the contract arrangements, and the people doing the work here were contractors rather than employees by the airline itself. So this is just just explodes from here, how much you can learn from this. So imagine you get 100, 150 stories like this. You can design a solution, or you can analyze them on your own. I should start with the analysis here. Or you can start thinking about, well, it's actually not how I understand this site that matters. It's how they understand themselves that matters here. So how can we invite people to make sense of this? And it's unfortunate because I think, especially going back to that initial head office discussion that I was involved in, we seem to think that people on sites are mostly like bad robots that we need to reprogram. They're unable to find direction themselves, and we constantly need to supervise them. But humans are not machines. They're not robots. They're intelligent collaborators, or at least they can be if we give them the conditions to do that. So I developed this little framework to think about this, some quick fire concepts around, sure, we can approach change as something we do to people. And that gives us change. Change can actually work in that context, but we need to organize it very differently. Whereas if we want to move into the generative change space, where we have lots of ideas, where our change efforts lead to sustainable solutions, we need to configure people as change makers themselves. Change needs to be done by people, and we need to give them a chance to be entrepreneurs for their own workplace. And that's really what this process is about. But that requires me to not be the hero, to not do the analysis, to not say what the solution is, but to just move that forward and let the organization work that out itself. So when it comes to the analysis, I talk a lot about collaborative analysis or sort of collective sense making and those kind of terms. You need to get multiple actors to look at the data, to look at these stories together, to look at, it doesn't have to be stories. It can be, survey results, and just put it up on walls and get people to sort of figure it out. Lead them up to it, but don't tell them what it means. They need to figure out the meaning for themselves here. And it could be that people have, conflicting truths about it. And one such story happened. I was on a mine site, and there were people gathering around stories that were about pre-starts meetings. And people were talking about how after the pre-starts, people still didn't know which truck to go to, where it was parked. And they ended up where do I go? Where do I need to go? And it was just there was a lot of wasted time there. And the supervisor was part of the discussion. He said, well, the problem, mate, with these pre-start meeting is people are lazy. They just sit there with their hard hats over their eyes and they're not paying attention. And then one of the, frontline based people there said, well, the issue is that, our supervisors are not very engaging in the presentation. They just read off a piece of paper. It's so boring. It's difficult to pay attention because you're just listening for this piece of information, sea of information. And someone else said, it's the room. The room is so noisy. We've got air cons. This was, central Queensland. It was really hot. And it's really just difficult to hear. So why would we convey information that is critical in an environment that is not conducive to? And other people said it's the entire format that's messed up. Why do we inform 70 people in 7 minutes? We could be handed this information when we're traveling to site in the bus in the morning. They started moving into solution space. But the point is that the same issue could be understood from lots of different angles. And it's important that everyone can explain what their perspective is here. And that you get new voices explaining what the issue is. And there's a bit of magic that happens here when people meet a different perspective and they start listening to each other. They start getting, hey, we both agree that pre-start meetings don't work. We may not agree yet why it doesn't work, but we agree that it doesn't work. So they start having a collective ambition forming by just talking it out. Hey, what if we start making some changes? What would work for you? What would work for you? And I got a photo here from one such session, which I ran with. This is from a research organization down in, let's suggest New Zealand to not be, to leave them some anonymity here. But you can see how the stories are sitting up on the walls and ask people to pair up. and put little post-it notes on every story that they read, what they think is about. So you see which stories have been read. And it's very collaborative. It's a very sort of buzzy environment that people talk about this. And I ask them to move stories together that illustrate the same underlying issue. I give them a bit of a template to sort of work out what is going on here. So this is sort of how it works out. So this takes about 4 hours to run for me, and it's not a problem to keep people engaged. They just run. The energy is very high in these things because it's their work.
I was going to say it's their, the energy in this room would have been through the roof. Like they would have been so excited to be heard and being listened to and being understood and having their thoughts put down on pieces of paper and being able to collaborate with other people. The energy and the enthusiasm just would have been intense.
That's it. And it's good fun. And, I asked them calibration questions. How, on a scale from 1 to 10, how good a representation is this of, what you're facing here? They say 11. It's 11 good.
Yeah.
Just say, this is it. This is what we've been trying to. And there's a bit of a strangeness because when I ask them, how surprised are you what's on the walls here? People say, I'm not surprised at all. This is what we've been saying. But the fact that what people have been saying and feeling and talking about for years is now black on white, that it's been written down and it's been objectified, if you will, actually seems to be it's very validating, and it gives people a lot of hope for the future that we can do something with this. It's sort of graspable. We can move them around. We can make sense of them, and we can do this together. It's not being done to people, but you can see how people start to become entrepreneurs already here in this session, right?
Do you find that people react differently to change in their workplace based on whether there's a fear mentality or whether there's a enthusiastic mentality from their leaders to offer that change and to offer those opinions and things like that?
No, I think leaders have a tremendous potential here. They can completely shoot this process down if they want to. If I'm not invited by a leader to run this process, I wouldn't do it, because it needs to allow the leader to be involved in a particular role. They can't be absent, but they can't be too present either. It can't be about the leader. This needs to be about...
They need to feel trusted and safe to say what they feel rather than having that fear of being dismissed or something because they say what they're actually feeling.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, sometimes it gets a bit heated in these situations because people bring things
up. That's
good. People are defensive about the solutions of the past and they try to sort of figure it out. And as a facilitator of these discussions is about, yes, okay, that sounds valid. What do you say about that? And sort of try to make a meeting point. It doesn't have to be a sort of an agreement, but it doesn't. What I'm looking out for here is that one agenda is not marginalizing someone else's agenda. Saying, okay, this is about, hey, that's important to you. That's important to you. We can agree that there's something that is not working here, and that's it. That's all we need to do at this stage. And then we can move into solution space later. And that seems to be, people are fine with that. Okay, we can agree to disagree. We don't have to dislike each other. Well, people dislike each other sometimes. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about sort of what comes after. How do we organize change? How do we organize actions here? Because this is where it can sort of fall over. Because people are normally, they've seen versions of this in the past and they go, okay, what happens now? Is this just a talk fest or shall we do something with this? And there's a few different options here. And I just want to highlight, so I'm going to talk about the option that's on the right, but I want to talk about it as a contrast to other versions of change, where we most probably use what we see most of in organizations, this sort of representative, let's create a little committee where they figure out what needs to happen and they roll that out onto more or less unwilling consumers. If you want to be a bit more refined, you create this sort of collective impact model where you create a coalition of people. This is more of the Kotter version of change. Collective impact is its own, and I don't want to be too dismissive. They have their places, and there's good things coming out of them. But if we really want to be in a generative space where ownership sits with the people, those two models are still change done to people. And I'm arguing for, let's think more about change as creating social movements in our organizations. We'll create a multi-actor movement that is an open change process where people can move in and out of, where they can make sense of the futures and their contributions, where they can opt in and opt out over time. It doesn't have to be such a firm, stale method as the other ones here. So the issues with the options on the left here is that they have limited legitimacy. They work for the people that are involved, but you run the risk of missing the complexity. You might run the risk of missing the engagements through them. So I say, why don't we just open up this? Why don't we make it completely voluntary to be part of a group working together to create change around here? Have a genuine invite that people can respond to. And they can say, no, I don't want to be part of that. And say that this is not about a particular solution because we don't know what the solution is yet. But this is about creating better outcomes for this site. So talk about the outcomes that you want to create. We want to create if you want to go in a sort of a lean, clean, a well-running workshop where you can, eat your lunch on the floor. If that's what you want to create, create that vision and let people talk about that as sort of where you want to end up. But then you start the work of asking for their ideas, and I like to sort of liberate people from the pressure of finding solutions. People often feel like that's not a good enough idea. So I don't really care. We just want lots of ideas. We want quantity. Anything that can make things a little bit better. Talk about that. An improvement rather than a solution.
And by doing that, you're also allowing people to not worry whether their ideas are correct or not, but you're giving them a choice to share their ideas. But by doing that, you're allowing other people to get a different viewpoint on how other people think, which is exactly what you were talking about before, just embracing different points of view.
Yeah, so I normally stay involved for the first session and they get it. And once that's sorted out that this is a forum where we just want lots of ideas, and then we sort it out and try to have minimal framework later on to find the good ideas. I can talk about that in a moment, but when it comes to trying these ideas, try to make them so small that it's actually safe to fail. That it's, for example,
the worst case scenario isn't terrible.
No, exactly. Think through what is the worst thing that can happen here. And people say, well, the worst is that probably doesn't work out. People won't use it, for example. Okay, well, that seems safe enough. Well, let's try that then. Something just comes to mind. One group, one thing they want to do, they had lots of meetings on, I think it was Monday mornings. They had sort of pre-start, and then they had the front line, and then they had the supervisors, then they had the leadership. So the whole Monday morning was full of meetings. So why don't we just merge them into one big meeting? And they spent 2 hours talking about if they could do that or not. And in the end, it was one of them said, why don't we just try it? Right? They were so worried about making this change and what could potentially happen. And then they go, well, let's try it then. That's the only way. Sometimes that's the only way you can find out, because you can't think through all the possible contingencies that might come out of it. So just try it one time. If it doesn't work back, you can go back.
You've hit the nail on the head there to a very sore point for myself. I cannot stand when people will come to you with a problem and not a solution, or even small snippet of a thought of a solution, and it's a completely dismissive environment. And it's like, let's come up with a solution and let's try different things. And if there's an issue, let's try and change things, and let's see what can happen from a tiny little conversation. Don't just dismiss it and assume that nothing will change or it won't work. Because how will you know?
Yeah. I don't want to be, I think ideas should be tested out and you can argue about them. But after a while, when you argue it, well, let's just try it. That seems like a good enough. Does it even have a
Yeah.
remotely chance of being successful or useful? Yeah, okay, let's do that. Yeah. Stuff that can kill this is obviously bureaucracy, that it takes too long, that you need to go somewhere else, can ask for permission. So try to integrate authority into the group that is working, that they have clear boundaries of what they can go and do changes to immediately. So if you have maybe the most senior person on site and they're connected to a bigger, richer decision maker higher up in the hierarchy, so it's only a phone call away if they need to spend, if they need to start spending some money or make some more strategic changes. But the trick here as well, where I've seen the groups go wrong, is they start with some big, hairy, audacious goal they want to go after, rather than start with something small and simple where you can have a quick win, because the wins are what will fuel this group going forward.
They'll encourage it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you get a few of those and this group gets not only the group itself, but people talk about them as a very do group, and it becomes easier for people to sort of want to be part of it. And then the trick is really to, scale up, embed what works. So this is quite a different approach to change. This is the one that sort of starts small and heads off in a direction. And sometimes it's helpful to have a bit of a framework to say, yes, we have a direction of travel. You can talk about if it's about this sort of pristine workshop environment, or if it's about safety practices that work for everyone or something else. And you can break that down into different things of saying, well, sure, tools is one area that we want to improve, but training is another one, and IT is another one. And we're going to try lots of different things around all these things. And starting with one area and see what movement creates, because all these issues are interconnected. If you start making changes in the tool situation, you're going to have, changes to productivity, which is going to have changes to, commercial.
There's a flow-on effect. Yeah.
It's quite unpredictable.
And change, I don't think, should ever be linear, because if change is linear, then how are we ever going to stray off course and figure out that there might be a better way of doing something? I think it's so important to not have a fixed destination, but literally an idea. Let's see what we can do.
It's nice. I like to talk less about destination and more about direction of travel. And I talk less about sort of creating change as if you know what's needed, and more about discovering change. Discovering new ways of working. Hey, this is a better way. Let's do more of that. And you start building that up. But you need to go out and discover this. And you do that by having multiple probes, multiple experiments, multiple tests running in parallel to generate lots of, it's more of a gardening metaphor around this, of see where it takes off, or I guess a shotgun approach to change rather than a silver bullet to change. So you shoot something wide and see what it hits, and then you go over there and take another shot from there, and then you zigzag in the direction of travel here. The last point I want to make around this is something about leadership here, or the role of the facilitator, if you will. So I like to explain this along two-dimensional or two axes here. When we think about change, we can have change that is very high spec on the y-axis here, where we want to be somewhere specific, or we can have it very open. On the x-axis, on the bottom axis here, we have different degrees of how much we need to involve each other. On the left, it's less. On the right, we need to really engage a lot of people. What I see a lot of is this notion of hero leadership is, how can I get you to do X? And the issue with that, well, there's a lot of issues with that, but is that X has normally already been figured out by me, right? So there's very limited input for you to have about what X should look like.
Yeah, my way or the highway type mentality.
That's where it comes, and you need to be a salesperson, and you need to be quite an entertainer to be a good heroic leader, or a super charismatic or impressive. That's how you get followership. It becomes about vision, and then you need people. You desperately need people in that version. But what you need them for is more their physical delivery of your vision. You don't want them to think too much for themselves in that space, and you want them to download the vision. Going back to that, version of social change I had before. What I've been talking about here today is more about a collaborative challenge. How can we improve this thing, whatever it is? And it's not about followership. It's about creating fellowship. It's about people working together. It's about creating community with a purpose. And the purpose of that is not to just put a fixed vision in place, but it's to go out and discover something. When I talk about it, I always think about the Fellowship of the Ring, partly because of that. But it's that thing of unlikely band of misfits coming together, and it's the diversity of that group that gives it its power. I mean, it's a complete make-believe story, but the metaphor, the analogy goes quite far about how it's about discovering pathways for change. It's about what they all can contribute with. Every contribution grows the strength of that community. And you don't really know what people are going to contribute with when you start, but you have to give them the chance to be, intelligent collaborator in there. And that's, over time you see people's passions turn on, and they really, set on fire for creating better workplaces.
They feel valued and they feel included, and they'll feel energized to want to contribute to grow the company that they're working with or for. And it's I think it's a very, very critical trait that every company needs to have, is a collaborative approach to all things. Obviously, there's going to be certain areas where collaboration is not ideal or it won't help. But I think for the most part, you need to be able to feel safe and heard in a company, and trust that something will change from it.
Especially when you're dealing with complex challenges where you don't have the answers, or best practices are not really available. But my point with this slide is really that there's a role for a leader in collaboration. Someone needs to initiate this thing. Someone needs to invite people. Someone needs to organize the space that people are in. Someone needs to sort of keep an eye on, is everyone connected in here? And make sure that we sort of stick with the purpose of this. And sometimes you have to step forward as a host to make that happen. But quite often you have to step back and be in the background and let people figure things out. When I run my collective sense-making sessions, for example, I need to be there at the front and say welcome to people, and I need to explain the purpose, put their minds in there. But then I need to be invisible for the next 45 minutes because they need to read the stories, they need to do the talking, and then I need to step forward again. And that is a different approach to leadership, or a change role that is quite different. It's about facilitation. There's a lot of soft skills involved. But I actually think it's more than soft skills. It's actually a different thinking about change altogether.
It's a very there's no ego involved in being the change host in a company, is there? There's no hero mentality either, I don't think.
I sometimes feel, I have ego, and it's a part of me that wants to be successful in all of this, and which is a good driver sometimes, but there's a lot of it it's not about me. This is about you, and I have to remind myself of that sometimes. But so I just want
so you're telling me you're human? Got it.
I don't know. Okay. We can talk about that a bit more, but I just want to pull this together where you have maybe a few minutes for questions at the end here. But so I think just the summary of what we've been talking about here is that we can identify that some challenges that we face are adaptive challenges. They're not technical problems. They don't have technical solutions. And when that's what we're facing, I find you just have to start with what is. Don't jump to solutions. Just start by exploring that issue. And then invite people in. Engage them in this sort of generative conversation about possibilities. Open that up and start with, not necessarily blank canvas, but really open up what could be going on. The future is sort of unwritten in this space. And then you allow people to be sort of self-organized around what they want to do. Let them suggest things that they could contribute with, because they are the ones closest to the pain points of existing solutions, and they have the most time to figure things out or what could be going on, and organize a low bureaucracy administrative way to give permission to try new things. Keep it small, do micro experiments, learn quickly, move with speed, and scale things up and embed that, and celebrate that, and make sure that you track all the other flow-on effects that it generates, because it's not just that thing that you measured. Take lots of before and after pictures. That hangar, that workshop that I was talking about earlier. The change in the look and feel of the place was just so tangible. And one lesson learned from me from that was to, the first time I visited the place, take lots of photos, because you don't really know what it's going to look like in 2 months' time. But the lines on the floor, the way that panels were organized instead of a stack, they were, slotted in a stand. So, there's lots of evidence of this being, how change was created here. The last thing on the last one is be a change host. Invite fellowship rather than followship for this thing. And you're off to a really good start to have a change that is, your engagement score is going to go through the roof. It's going to be beneficial for productivity and ownership and safety, all depending on what solutions people come up with, obviously. But it's quite unexpected. You buy into so much potential through this, and you don't really know what that potential is when you start. You somehow have to trust the process. And being able to explain what the process is helps with getting permission to run something like this. But yeah, so that's what I had for today.
I think something I might ask on behalf of other people is what would you suggest to a company or someone that reaches out to you that doesn't feel safe if they contribute anything or share their thoughts? What are some key things that they could do to potentially break that barrier?
If the individual or the organization doesn't have a mechanism to share thoughts and ideas?
Yeah, or like say I had something in my mind that I would love to share an example of and share something that I think we could potentially change in the company. What if I don't have anybody in my company that I feel safe enough to go to and share those thoughts without being dismissed or without being looked down upon, for example?
Look, there's lots of ways of collecting ideas and creating a safe space. Of course, you can have it in a sort of personal meeting between a leader and employees to put your ideas forward. Other version, I don't want to suggest a suggestion box, but if you really feel like that,
carrier pigeon, anonymous notes.
No, but what I have had great success with is what's called sort of crowdsourcing platforms, where people can put ideas onto a central challenge, and they do it online. Just say, hey, this is what I think, how we could improve it, and help people to work through the idea around it, that it's sort of full transparency on it, because that keeps some of that policing in check as well. If you want to step forward with ideas, you have to say thank you very much. Let's see how people react to this, and invite a collaborative discussion with other people, and let more people than just the leader being the one who can sort of rate the value of the contribution.
I think it's really important too, as employees, to remember that our employers and our leadership team, they're not mind readers. And as people on the front line of whatever career you're in or whatever role you're in or industry, it's important to remember that they don't necessarily know your job in and out, day on day. And we need to remember that just because something that's a major issue, well, not a major issue even, just a small issue that snowballs or whatever, or gradually builds to a point where you just can't take it anymore, they might not know that that's happening. So it's so important to remember that sharing your thoughts and being collaborative and going to people with issues that you have a potential solution to change is critical because, like I said, not all leaders understand exactly what's happening on the front line, and not all frontline people know what's happening in the leadership team. So there can quite often be a disconnect, and I think it's important to remember that bridging that gap is critical.
Nice. And I think once we've collected people's ideas, if you ask people for their ideas, you have a little bit of an obligation to actually do something with it.
I was going to say that earlier. It's all well and good to get all these ideas and have a collaborative session with people and understand what their thoughts and feelings are. But it's that next step that's crucial in actually actioning some change and actioning some positive growth.
Well, at least to respond to the idea. That's the,
oh, yeah.
Quite a lot of time, that's just people can actually ask for, quite unreasonable things at times.
No, I'm not saying action everything, but at least acknowledge.
Sometimes there's not the time for the idea. There might, especially when it comes to ICT ideas, the ICT development pipelines in organizations are years long. And here comes another idea. So you're in the back of the pipeline. Of course we can do this.
Yeah.
But, you have to wait 2 years.
Yeah.
Or it costs too much. Or actually,
there's a hierarchy of priorities as well. We need to be real. Yeah.
Over here, and it sort of needs to fit in. There's other complexities about that timing, and quite frankly, but people appreciate, even if people say, no, we can't do your idea, and here's why. And the worst thing you can do is just leave the idea without even, acknowledging that it exists.
Acknowledging it.
Right?
It's like going for a job, like submitting your resume for a job, and you never hear back from them. Yeah, it's like, oh, okay. But if you hear back from them and they say no, but here's why, or thank you for reaching out, we've received your thing, we'll keep it on file. Like that tiny little step, that little bit extra effort of just acknowledging goes a long way, doesn't it?
Nice.
Well, I think that is all we have time for today. Daniel, as always, we absolutely adore you and everything that you guys do at Southpac. And I hope that everybody that was joining us today got a lot of information, collaboration, listening, changing our points of view, hearing other people's stories and acknowledging other people's thoughts and ideas is something that we should all take on board. I will email everybody a recording of this session that has registered to attend. We'll also have it up on our website, our YouTube channel, and as a podcast wherever you listen to those. I'll include all the links Daniel has on screen here now. So his LinkedIn, his contact details, and how to join their mailing list as well. So Daniel, again, thank you so much. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the week, and we'll chat to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Bye.